All right, excited to be here today. So I'm going to approach this from just a little bit of a different direction because I am an agronomist and not necessarily a cattle person as much, but I did grow up on a cattle operation, so I do know kind of how this thing works. But to start off, I'm curious, who in here has virtual fence currently? Just a handful. So most of you guys are here to try and figure out if virtual fence is right for your operation. How many of you are currently doing some type of rotational grazing? Okay, many of you. All right, that's excellent. That is great. So I am going to talk about some principles in general about how to grow better grass because really what we're doing when we're producing beef beef is a grass harvester, and that's the first and foremost. So your main economic driver here is how much grass you can produce. If you can produce more grass, you can grow more animals. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. um, More grass is grown by healthy pasture. So let's think about, what does a healthy pasture look like? And there are just a few things. And you know what? Healthy pasture is quite subjective. And so you can run down this list of things and you can say to yourself, okay, is my pasture healthy or not? Is it productive? Does the water infiltrate? Is there bare spots in the soil? Diversity? Are nutrient cycling? You know, do I have soil erosion? All of those things. If you go down that list and you say, oh, yep, I'm probably in the probably not healthy category, then we can work on our grazing to make some changes to improve the pasture. So, the number one influencer of healthy pasture and healthy soil in general is can be shrunk down pretty simply to biomass production. The more biomass you can produce on that acre, the healthier the pasture gets. And that's due to a number of things. It increases the plant energy stores, provides energy source for the soil microbes, contributes energy to root growth, increases mycorrhizal fungi associations, um, enables good water cycling function, and improves available forage. During my PhD project, I got the chance to work a lot with water. That was my main focus. And I found that as you increase your biomass production, you are at the same time increasing, in this graph you'll see here, you're increasing your soil moisture. I also found that you're increasing your infiltration rates, um, and you're increasing the time that it takes to get to that critical drought level. So if you look across the fence and you see your neighbor is doing really well, it's a drought, and I mean, he's been rotating his cattle and stuff, and he has tons of grass, and it seems like he's pulling through the drought better than you. Well, maybe it's because he's actually returning more biomass into the soil and creating a better network for the plants, for the soil, everything. So, very important. Okay, where does pasture health fail? Everybody looks good when it rains. Um, when it doesn't rain is when you can start picking out whether you're doing a good job or not. Um, so, how do you how do you look on a dry year? Is really what I want to look at. And really on a wet year, you might be overstocked or not. Um, and why does grazing in the fall lead to grazing hard in the fall lead to poor pasture growth next year? Why do pastures perform poorly during and after a drought year? Um, and where do your cows put manure? Those are the questions that you have to ask yourself if you feel like your pasture is failing you. Now, I call this a vicious cycle. If you look at this little graph right here that I've made, typically when you're grazing grass, you're going to go through this cycle. You graze or cut, and the top growth is short, right? And then root energy reserves are used to help regrow the grass. Once the grass is fully recovered from that grazing event, you graze it again and you continue this cycle. That's why rotational grazing works, is because you graze the grass and you get off of it and you can go somewhere else while that grass is regrowing. Now, what happens if you don't? Um, there's a lot of scientific literature on this, and we'll get into it just a little bit. But you end up, you use your root reserves, and then if you graze or cut too soon, then what happens? You end up with a shrunken root system, and before it can recover, you've grazed it again, and before it can put more energy back into the roots, and the roots die back even more. That's a major issue. And that's why oftentimes the spring after you've had a real bad drought, you're going to see pretty stunted grass recovery. Um, we saw that, the further south you went in the state this year, we saw a lot of fescue being really slow this spring, especially in the southwest part of the state. Part of that is because they were dry last fall, and part of that is because of the funny temperature swings that we had this spring. Um, but a lot of that had to do with where were the roots this spring when we started grazing. Okay, so what does defoliation have to do with root growth? Um, and if you look at this table right here, this is some research that was done out of Tennessee on a number of different grass species. And what they found is that if you remove less than 40% of of the top growth, nothing happens to the root structure. It remains the same. Once you get to that 50% level, a slight reduction in roots, and the more you graze, the more the roots stop growing, and that can be a problem. So once we get to that 80% of the total growth removed, we're looking at 100% root stoppage. So that plant just went to a screeching halt to try and regrow its solar panel. Okay. Another thing, um, how long are you letting that pasture rest? The more you let your pasture rest, the more grass it will grow, and the more well recovered it will be, the faster it will grow in reoccurring grazing events. So if you have a short or frequent grazing system where you're coming back, maybe every 20 days or so, you're going to see less dry matter yield, which is what we're after, right? If we're growing beef, um, than if you make a really long or adequate regrowth. So, what does this look like on a Missouri pasture? Yeah, you can see almost a double in yield production. So if you're out there and you just turn the cows out onto your 200-acre patch and let them graze all summer, um, you may be leaving a lot of yield on the table, um, based on what you could do if you were rotationally grazing. Okay, the next thing, fertility. And this is a big issue because, I'm guessing quite a few of you put some fertilizer out on your pasture. Well, and you're shaking your head. Yeah, I know. Um, right. So fertilizer is expensive, especially this year. And really, in my mindset, I'm thinking, yeah, if you're grazing well, you never need to be applying fertilizer onto your pastures. It should be able to sustain itself. Why? Because around 90 to 98% of the nutrients that your animals are consuming comes out the back end. And so if you're catching that, and if you're putting it in the right place, then you shouldn't need to fertilize. Um, this is some research that was done here at the University of Missouri up at the Forage Systems Research Center where I'm housed. And what they found, they did a number of different things. They had a bunch of different rotations. If you look here, rotational frequency, continuous grazing, and look at the number of years it takes to get one pile per square yard. One pile of manure can influence the about the square yard around it. Um, Continuous grazing, we're looking at 27 years before you get that 1 pile per square yard number. Bring that all the way down to maybe a 2-day rotational frequency, and we're looking at 2 years before you get there. That's significant. That's money back in your pocket because you are reducing the amount of fertilizer that you need. Another thing is the distance to water. This was done concurrently with this research where they measured the feet from water and they measured the density of the cow pies. Now, um, these two paddocks, one is in a 3 pasture rotation and one is in a 24 pasture rotation. So this paddock is smaller and the water is closer to where the animals are. So there's a rule of thumb that was developed out of this research. And the rule basically says that if you are around this 7 to 800 feet from water, your utilization falls off and you're not getting the manure coverage that you need. Water is really important if you want utilization and if you want good manure coverage because the cows will end up loafing over here at the water, they'll loaf over here at the shade, and they may graze some out here, but they are not putting their manure there. The closer you can get the water to where the cow's feed is, the more manure distribution you're going to have. And we see that here with the 24 pasture rotation, right? Where we can see we're getting a lot more coverage of manure across the entire paddock. Okay. So some keys for high grass productivity. Keep utilization to 50% or less, and that way you're not stopping the roots. Reduce the grazing pressure during sensitive periods when the grass is just starting to grow or when it's just starting to regrow. Here in Missouri, we're talking about March and August, September timeframe because fescue resets during the summer months, and so that fall growth is new growth. Okay, so reduce your grazing pressure during those times. Increase your return intervals. If you can get it 30 days plus, especially during the summertime months, then you can grow a little more forage. You can give the pasture rest. You're doing a lot of good things there. Okay. Avoid the temptation to graze hard during a drought. That's probably the worst thing you can do for your grass. Once you get to that 50% utilization rate and you go back and you say, well, daggone, this grass didn't grow, but there's still 5 or 6 inches of it out there. I guess I'll just graze that next. No, leave that there. But your cows, I don't know, do what you got to do, but don't graze it again until it's completely recovered. Okay. Well, I was almost done. Extend your rest periods during slow growth. Yep, that's kind of this graze hard concept, And then utilize fence and water to increase manure distribution. Okay? Now let's switch on to virtual fence and let's talk about that for a minute. Virtual fencing is a grass management tool, not an animal management tool. We have this temptation to think of what it can do for the animal and not so much what it's going to do for the grass. And the grass is the important part, right? So this is a meme that I like to share. Okay, if you're not currently using temporary electric fence, you're going to have a hard time learning your virtual fence system. And it's really funny when you see this happening because there is a steep learning curve in just learning how to graze, right? And also, there's a lot of value still in using pigtails and polywire. There's a lot of value still there. Okay. All right. Let's talk about let's compare virtual fence to electric fence for just a second. This may be flipped of what you might think it is. when we're looking at herd size, there is a definite scale advantage. We already know that. The big guys, they may make a little more money because their cost per unit is lower. This is one of those situations where we have smaller herd size, the cost per head for using electric fence, this is the black line right here, for using electric fence on a small herd size, let's say less than 50, we have a massive cost per head because our time and labor is spread over fewer animals. It really doesn't take that long um, to move the poly wire, and it takes about the same amount of time to move poly wire for 50 animals as it does for 400 animals. So keep that in mind. This is scale sensitive. The bigger your farm gets, the easier it is, or the bigger your herd size gets, the easier it is to justify temporary electric fence. So that's important as well. All right. I am working on a project that this is being done at the Northern Missouri Research Education um, and Extension Center at the Forage Systems Research Center in Northern Missouri. We're doing a virtual fence showcase. I currently have all four of the brands represented here, and I am managing all of those virtual fence products. In addition to that, I have my own beef cattle, and I am currently grazing them with pigtails and polywire. So on a given day, I'm in the apps, all of the apps, and I'm on my own farm moving animals every day as well. So I kind of have I'm getting a pretty good idea of what the capabilities of each one of these systems is, and that's what I'm trying to figure out with the virtual fence showcase. Um, and this is funded by the Missouri Soil and Water Conservation, and they um, funded this first to take a very critical look at virtual fence, um, and so that we can understand how we can use it to conserve soil and water. So the ideal virtual fence product, easy to use, durable and reliable, minimal labor, and high accuracy for precision grazing. That's a very important thing, that high accuracy, because we are in a high productivity environment. And so we need something that does not have a ton of drift, because we don't want a rogue shock in the middle of our 1 acre paddock. That's important, right? So this started this year. Currently, I have Halter, Monil, East Shepherd, and Nofence on the farm. And Herd Street is coming soon, and we're getting some sheep and goat stuff coming soon as well. In fact, I put some sheep and goat collars on last week. So we're getting that going as well. All right. Couple different features in the app that I like of each one of these. One is the Halter. Halter has a really easy to use app, and you can schedule shifts really easily. And I enjoy the functionality of the app. It may be the most easy to use app out of all of them. Um, Gallagher, there's a bunch of things to like about Gallagher as well. They have this tracking thing for each animal. If you want to see where an animal's been, you can click on its location and you can track where it's been. And I also like that they have a desktop version. They're the only company that has a desktop version. And I feel like I can make really good plans for that. Now, Halter says they're coming out with one on Monday. So, anyway, um, Monil, I really like. So you can adjust an active paddock with Monil, and I really like that feature. Um, and then Nofence, they have a herd replay thing, which is really great to use as well. So Caitlin's telling me that I need to go fast. So things to think about when you're looking at getting virtual fence. One is look at stuff like this around your farm where you have maybe some sucker rods sticking out, because that ends up being a place where cows can catch and rip off the collars. And this was a night I had 6 collars come off in one night, and they were all broken, and that's not what we want, right? Um, The other one is do water improvements first. This is not going to be very useful unless you already have water in place. Um, Attend a grazing school. If you haven't done so yet, this technology won't be very useful unless you know what you're actually doing with it. Um, and then be honest with yourself about the value of virtual fence on your operation. Know your numbers before you purchase it.